Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video I want to talk about something a little more personal. Nothing major, but I wanted to take you through my journey with the Final Fantasy franchise and what the Final Fantasy franchise has meant to me in my life. You know, I turned 30 this last year, and Endwalker is going to be bringing about the end of a decade-long story, the initial arc of Final Fantasy XIV, so we can start a new one going forward. And, it gets you back to thinking about, the last 10 years, and you think back a little bit further. And, I've been given a great opportunity. I'm very fortunate to be able to do what I do and to share my passion with so many people. So part of sharing that passion is beyond what you see in just a guide or a YouTube video. And I wanted to take this opportunity to share that with you. It's a video I've chickened out from making several times. Even in just the past couple of days, I've chickened out from it. But I think it's about time I shared with you my journey through Final Fantasy and what it has meant to me. I have some bullet points here to kind of keep me on track, because you guys know I like to run my mouth even here in the intro. Maybe I'll do like a fake little Q&A style, like someone else is interviewing me section for the video. I guess if that's going to be the case, then I should do like, the Q&A intro that you see at the front of every like Wired video or something. Hi, my name is Mike, more commonly known by my online name as Mr. Happy, and this is my journey through the Final Fantasy franchise. This is my story. That's so lame. I think I'm going to cut that. So I got started with Final Fantasy through a friend. I was, 7, 8 years old, I don't know, something at the time. And I went over to my friend's house, and his older brother was playing Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1. The first ever thing I saw of the Final Fantasy franchise was my friend's older brother fighting Ruby Weapon. Yeah, I knew the double summon Hades Knights of the Round strats before even buying the game, because that's what he was doing to try to beat it. And I saw it, and I knew immediately that I had to try this game out. I saw the graphics, I heard the music, it was so exciting. So I went home, but I didn't know it was Final Fantasy VII. So I went to my mother and went, Mom, Christmas is coming. Can I have Final Fantasy for Christmas? And I got it for Christmas, but I didn't get Final Fantasy VII. I got Final Fantasy VIII. So that was the first Final Fantasy game I ever owned and played all the way through. And I didn't understand why it was a different game. I didn't even notice the Roman numerals when I was looking at it. But, I played through that. I loved it. I went and asked my friend why mine was different. He said his was Final Fantasy VII. So I eventually went and got that. And from there, it's just one after the other, Final Fantasy Anthology, Final Fantasy Origins, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, 11, 12, 13. And the list goes on, and it still grows to this day, whether it be through remasters, new releases, all sorts of things. And that's a journey that I'm so grateful for, because I never was into a game as much as that before I saw that Final Fantasy VII at my friend's house. So from that moment on, it set me on the path that has led me to where I am today. Now, in terms of how it actually impacted my life, I think when it comes to things we're passionate about, whether it be a video game or some other form of media, maybe music, a movie, anything that kind of sets us on the path journey, which I've said way too many times in this video already, it's about how it actually affects us, how it inspires us, how it really directs us. And for me, I had issues with socializing growing up. To this day, I know it may not seem like it because I do all these YouTube videos and I live stream, but I have a lot of issues with basic social interaction. I'm super awkward about it. I really don't know how to do it. And it takes somebody else making me comfortable before I can ever truly open up and really be myself. But when I was young, I didn't know how to do that. So for me, video games were an escape. And there was no better escape for me than Final Fantasy. That was really the age, especially, that I was having a hard time trying to make new friends, and I was barely able to hold on to the friends that I had just because I was scared to talk to them, even at that young age. So when I would come home and I'd have this massive game, this 3-4 disc game that I know I just have so much ahead of me, I would take every possible minute going through every possible map and leveling every character and finding every item. And I didn't have the internet, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. We didn't have a computer in my house at that point, so I had to do it as long as it took. So every game was 100 hours, 200 hours, 300 hours, and that got me through a lot of the harder times going into my teenage years, even going into my high school and my college years, where I had friends, I had social groups, but I was still never really sure how to navigate those things. And whenever I was kind of lost or kind of in my own head too much, I found myself visiting these diverse fantasy worlds and diving into their deep and rich characters and story. And I had a huge appreciation for it growing up. So it goes without saying for me, although I'm going to say it in this video, that I don't think I could have learned how to deal with my own emotions, deal with the way I was in my head if I didn't have something so focused and so concentrated on like Final Fantasy. Now, that's a multifaceted part of my life, especially just because there were single player Final Fantasy games, but there was also an MMO. Final Fantasy XI is a game you will hear me talk about frequently, most of the time with some disdain. I look back at those days, I look back at those years, and I think of the number of hours I spent essentially getting nothing done, running around in circles in Juneau or sitting around waiting for a monster to appear, maybe while I did my homework for high school or whatever it was. And I think about, man, what could I have done with all that time? And the more I think about it, the less I really worry about what I would have done with that time instead, because I think about where I am now. Because Final Fantasy XI was probably the most important thing for me getting over, or at least being able to cope with social anxiety. Because it was really my first online method of communication with other people. I would join link shells, guilds, however you want to refer to them, depending on your terminology. And I would socialize that way with people who were most of the time far older than I was, because it wasn't a lot of 13, 14-year-olds playing Final Fantasy XI in my experience, outside of the couple of friends that I played it with on occasion. But that's where I started to pick up social tics, social cues, figure out what people like talking about, how people like to talk. And I know it was the internet, so maybe not the best place to have learned about things like that, but at the very least, it opened the door, because before that, it was just, I was too shy, I was too nervous. I just couldn't figure out people. And that's tough when you're growing up and you really just don't know how to make a new friend or how to thank someone or just anything at all outside of just basic manners. But Final Fantasy XI really gave me confidence with people that I was actually able to translate into face-to-face interactions, joining clubs at school or being able to go to a party in college or something like that. And it never really worked all the way, but it opened the door. And for me, that's one of the most important things. So I might give Final Fantasy XI a hard time. I don't want the old days of Final Fantasy XI back now that I'm much older. I don't look back on them with the thought of fond memories, but I'm grateful for what it did for me more than anything else. In terms of a single player game though, Final Fantasy X. It's probably, I remember just seeing on the demo disc for the PlayStation 2 the intro scene before Sin Attacks and just my jaw hit the floor. Voice acting for the first time, the graphics, the combat, everything rang true for me. I played the base game, the non-international version, since I, didn't really have a method of having the international version at that point. I played it for easily my first save file, like 200 plus hours. So in terms of a single player Final Fantasy that I feel heavily impacted me, Final Fantasy X definitely takes the cake. But compared to Final Fantasy XI, which I think my characters collectively have over like 1,300 days played to this day, I think that might have more of an impact. And obviously, Final Fantasy XI leads into what I do now. I don't know if I'd be as interested in Final Fantasy XIV if I didn't play Final Fantasy XI first. So I played 1.0. It was what it is, exactly what everyone says it is. And I remember spending 2 months every day playing 8 hours a day just to get Pugilist to 50. And then stopping because it was just absorbing every ounce of my life. I went, I played a bunch of patches, beat a bunch of bosses, got legacy status, but that was a journey in and of itself that I always laugh when I think back at. But I think if I didn't play 1.0, I might not have been as inspired as I was when it started getting around the time that A Realm Reborn was being made. We had seen screenshots, we had heard of a new producer, a new director, and that they were going to try to revive the game. And at that point, I was several years into college. I'd started working an internship in New York City. And I started to be able to, really absorb things like YouTube. Live streaming had just started coming into play. I had seen Justin TV. I had watched Dyrus over on owned.tv. I was catching a lot of competitive esports and stuff that was there. And I was really starting to get absorbed into the culture of online content creation in its early days. But I didn't have the confidence really to do it. What I started doing, though, is in my own time, between time at the gym, time at school, time at work, I would put together a few YouTube videos here or there. Sometimes it was just me playing through a game or taking a live stream that I had to 2-3 people and just posting it to YouTube. Sometimes it was me grabbing a video camera and holding it to a monitor while I fought Kingdom Hearts 2 bosses, or kited a Final Fantasy 11 boss around, or played DDR, because I did that competitively too, and I used to make my own step charts and everything. So those were the really early days. I had this constant desire to create something, but I didn't really know how or if I actually could, even though I really wanted to. But then when things started taking a turn for the worse, my job was cut 2/3 of the company. I was among them. I had injured my shoulder. I couldn't go to the gym anymore. I suddenly had all this free time. I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school at that point anymore either. And I was lost. So I threw myself into one thing that had always been there, and that was creating content. And Final Fantasy was the first place I thought to turn. Final Fantasy 14, I started making these 101 info videos that were getting like 500 views, 800 views. I remember when the first time I got 1,000 views, blew my mind. Then, Beta Phase 3 came out. I started making videos just describing the abilities. We weren't allowed to record video at that point, but we were allowed to talk about what we experienced. So some screenshots, some experiences that we had, the way the jobs would probably be played, or the classes would probably be played as you gain new skills. And that was really the first place where I looked at what I was doing and saw, oh, this is really cool. People like this. I can keep doing this. And on top of that, I started getting involved in a lot of charity-related stuff over on Twitch. I had met my girlfriend playing Ragnarok Online too. The only good thing that ever came out of that game is the woman I've spent the last 8 years with at this point. That is the only good thing that came out of that game. And everything just started coming together in a way that gave me this huge confidence boost, this huge, honestly, ego boost, and I'll talk about that in a second. And Final Fantasy was giving me a direction in my life. It had always given me comfort. It had always given me something that taught, it gave me lessons, I suppose, but now it was an actual, I guess, option to just play it, to enjoy it, to share my passion about it, and people were listening, and people were enjoying it, and I was earning a living. And all I wanted to do was be passionate about this thing and continue on with my life. And that's kind of how it just panned out, because look at me now, it's 2021, again, 8 years later, and I'm making this video for anyone who even cares to watch it, because who really cares about some dude talking into his camera about his past experiences on the internet, right? Surprisingly more people than I would have ever anticipated. So I'm grateful for that every single day. That's not to say that I didn't have my ups and downs with the Final Fantasy franchise, especially towards the 13 era. I had kind of weaned off of it a little bit. 14 1.0 obviously didn't work out. Final Fantasy 13 wasn't my cup of tea. My opinion on that has changed to some degree since then, but I found myself kind of letting go of the franchise that had been so important to me. But all it took was that first screenshot I saw of 2.0. That it looked nothing like it. It was a concept screenshot of them fighting a chimera, and it all flooded back. But what ended up happening, while it gave me a direction, like I said, it gave me a confidence and ego boost, because I had never been noticed by people. I had never understood how to socialize with people, and now I had people kind of putting me on a pedestal. Something the first time it's ever happened in my life. And I didn't really know how to do that. Again, I had learned so little about socializing, about the world. And it was really through my interactions with people in Final Fantasy that I had shaped it up to that point. But I only shaped it in one kind of corner of the internet even. And we all know how that goes. You get some real gamer moments when it comes to stuff like that. And I started raising myself on a pedestal because people did, so I had to think it too, right? I had to be the king, I had to know everything, I had to be right every time. And I remember at the first fan fest for Final Fantasy 14, I cracked. I broke down crying. Somebody came up to me for a picture, and I guess it all just flooded in. I was not having a good time, I was stressed out, and something just broke. And it still took several months before I really accepted what that was, before my girlfriend had really helped me to accept that I needed to change, and that I was taking this thing that I loved and using it to just become a worse person. And that wasn't the game's fault. That was my fault. That was it. But through my passion, I realized what I needed to do. She helped me realize what I needed to do. And I was able to turn things around, kind of grow up for the first time, I suppose. Got older all my life, but I never felt like I grew up. And it wasn't until that day when I released a YouTube apology video. Good thing that never ended up on a tier list of any kind, right? And it meant a lot to me, because from that point on, I've always tried to push things forward with everything in my life and my career, and in how I perceive things about the franchise that I loved. I'd gone back and revisited things that I liked, things that I didn't like, things that kind of made me into that and kind of tried to push them out of my life, I suppose. And in the process, you know, I tried to learn a bit more humbleness. And all of this is over a game. You got to remember, everything that I just said is over Final Fantasy. Who would ever think that some form of media, entertainment, an MMO, an RPG, an online game that you're sharing with other people, that this much could come out of it? But when you see people proposing over a video game or at an event, or you see people connecting for the first time, and you're someone who never really understood all that, it kind of all brings it into perspective. And Final Fantasy XIV was the cherry on top for me when it came to the Final Fantasy franchise. Not that the Final Fantasy franchise is over, but it felt like the end of my personal journey, at least to the point where I felt like I fit in. I didn't even need to try to fit in. I could just be myself, and I understood who I was and what I needed to be. See, it's parts like this that make it hard for me to ever commit to releasing this video, because there's so many things I could say here. But at the end of the day, Final Fantasy gave me my life, as far as I'm concerned. And how many people get that opportunity? So I don't want to squander it, and I want to continue to share it with everyone on my YouTube channel, on my Twitch channel, social medias, whatever, through this expansion, through the next game release, through however many more remasters we end up seeing of, you know, the older games, whatever. I want to continue to share it. I want to continue to hear what you guys have to think about it, and and just be a part of it. There we go. I think I should probably wrap up here before I ramble on a little bit too far. But with that, thank you for just listening to some person on the internet share their experiences about a franchise and what it's meant to them. And feel free to share your experiences, even if it's not Final Fantasy related, in the comment section below, because I think we all have that one major thing that we find really profound on our life, on our experience. And I think it's fun sharing those kind of things. So thank you for taking your time to listen to this. I will see you all in whatever the next video I release ends up being. Until then, take care.